Feminism. You've heard the word a million times, right? It can be, well, a little complicated. It sparks huge debates, passionate agreement, and honestly, a lot of confusion. So what's it really all about? In this explainer, we're going to cut through all that noise and get right to the heart of what this powerful movement is all about.
Okay, so let's kick things off with a little-known fact that might just blow your mind. Before feminist was a political badge of honor, it was actually a medical term. Yeah, you heard that right. Back in the 19th century, doctors used it to describe, get this, either men becoming more feminine or women becoming more masculine. How wild is that? It's a pretty incredible starting point that just shows you how much the meaning of this word has evolved.
All right, so here's our game plan. First, we'll nail down a simple definition. Then, we'll take a trip through the first and second waves of the movement. After that, we'll dive into the big internal debates, because there are a few. And finally, we'll see where feminism is at today. Sound good? Let's go.
Okay, first up, what is feminism, really? We're going to trace its journey from that weird medical term all the way to the massive political idea it is today.
So, if you strip everything else away, what's at the very core of it all? Well, feminist thinking really rests on two fundamental beliefs. First, that women face disadvantages just because they're women. And second, and this is the big one, that this isn't set in stone. It's a situation that can and absolutely should be changed.
That core idea naturally leads us to the first big organized push for change, what we now call the first wave. This whole era was about one thing, really: getting basic rights. And they had a laser focus on the biggest prize of all, the vote. And you can see just how long that struggle was on this timeline. I mean, it really kicks off in the mid-1800s with events like the Seneca Falls Convention in the US. Then you get this huge win in 1893. New Zealand becomes the very first country to give women the vote. The US follows in 1920. But as you can see, winning the vote wasn't the end of the story, not by a long shot. It just paved the way for the second and then the third waves of feminist thought. So to sum up that first wave, it was all about achieving equality in the eyes of the law. The strategy was pretty straightforward. They believed that the right to vote, suffrage, was the ultimate key. Get a seat at the political table, and all the other dominoes of discrimination would start to fall. But here's the thing. Winning the vote, well, it didn't magically fix everything. It didn't solve what people at the time called the women's question, which was basically this endless debate about a woman's proper place. And that dissatisfaction leads us right into the second wave. The goalpost moved. It wasn't just about rights anymore. It was about something much, much bigger: liberation. And this second wave was powered by this incredibly potent, totally game-changing slogan: the personal is political. I mean, this phrase turned everything on its head. It basically said, hey, politics isn't just about laws and elections. It's also about what happens in your kitchen, in your bedroom, in your relationships. That was revolutionary. And this table here, this shows you exactly what they were fighting against. Society was neatly sliced into two zones. You had the public sphere, politics, careers, art. That was considered the domain of men. And then you had the private sphere, family, home, kids. That was seen as the woman's world. The entire goal of second-wave feminism was to just smash that wall to pieces. Now, you can't talk about this new way of thinking without talking about the brilliant French philosopher Simone de Beauvoir. Her work was absolutely crucial. She really laid the intellectual foundation for a lot of the radical ideas that came later. And this is probably her most famous line: "One is not born, but rather becomes a woman." So what on earth does that mean? She was dropping a philosophical bombshell that is now totally central to feminism. And this is the key distinction she was getting at: the huge difference between sex and gender. Sex, on the one hand, is biological. It's the physical differences between male and female. It's seen as natural, unchangeable. But gender? That's a whole different story. That's the set of cultural roles and expectations that society puts on you because of your sex. And here's the mind-blowing part. If gender is something we as a society construct, that means we can deconstruct it. We can change it. This leads us to the big, overarching system that feminists are trying to dismantle: patriarchy. Now, the word literally means rule by the father, but in feminism, it's used to describe that whole societal structure of male dominance, where men hold most of the power in the family, in the workplace, and in government. So how does this system actually work, according to radical feminists? Well, they argue it all starts in the family. They saw the traditional family, where the husband, father is the boss, as the root of it all.
And then that same power dynamic gets copied and pasted everywhere else, in schools, in offices, in politics. It's like a blueprint for the rest of society.
Okay, now this is super important to understand. Feminism isn't just one big, happy family where everyone agrees. It's a broad church with lots of different views and some pretty intense debates. So that brings us to our next section, the debates and differences within the movement.
One of the fundamental splits is between what's called equality feminism and difference feminism. So is the main goal to erase gender differences? To get to a point where we're all just people and gender doesn't matter? That's the equality side. Or is the goal to celebrate the things that make women unique, to focus on sisterhood and distinct female qualities? That's the difference side. And as you can probably guess, these two philosophies can lead to very, very different conclusions.
And another major divide is between liberal and radical feminists. Think of it this way. Liberal feminists tend to want a bigger piece of the existing pie. They work within the system for things like equal pay and equal opportunities. Radical feminists, though, they look at the whole system and say, the pie itself is rotten. We need to bake a whole new one. They believe patriarchy is so deeply ingrained that you can't just reform it. You have to tear it down and start over.
Now let's talk about a more recent but absolutely essential concept: intersectionality. This is the idea that you can't just look at someone's gender in a vacuum. A person's identity is made up of all these overlapping parts. The experience of being a woman is totally different if you're also a woman of color, or a queer woman, or a working-class woman. Intersectionality shows us how different systems of oppression, like sexism, racism, and classism, can pile on top of each other and create unique struggles.
Okay, so we've been through the waves, the debates, the big ideas. Where does all of that leave us? Let's get to our final section. Feminism today. Where is it now, and where is it headed?
You could almost say that feminism has become a victim of its own success. I mean, while you still see protests, so many of its core ideas have gone mainstream. Things that were once radical are now just standard practice in many companies and governments. And at the same time, the whole conversation has gotten bigger. It's moved beyond just women's rights to a much broader discussion about gender, power, and sexuality for everyone. And all of this change leaves us with a huge, lingering question. When you look at the incredible diversity of feminist thought today, liberal, radical, intersectional, trans feminism, the list goes on, you have to wonder, have the differences inside the movement become bigger than the similarities that used to hold it all together? It's a really interesting question, and the answer is going to define what feminism looks like for the rest of this century.